Today we will be creating this colorful ripple animation. It's a fun project, it's very beginner friendly, and you get an awesome result. You can find the tutorial files for free on my website, or you can just follow along and learn the technique. Also, I've created a website called cuddlyghost.com where I sell stickers of my artwork. Stickers are only $2 and shipping is always free. Okay, I have Blender 2.8 open. I'm going to hit A to select everything, X for delete, and Enter to actually confirm the delete. I'm going to hold Shift, hit A to add in a new object. I'm going to hover over Mesh and click on Plane. Okay, now I'm going to hit S for scale and 8 to scale it 8 times and then hit Enter. And I just did that to make it larger in the viewport here. So I'm in the middle mouse scroll just to zoom out. And let's go ahead and where you see this little wrench in this right panel, that's where the modifiers are. Click on Add Modifier, and we're going to click on, actually it's over here, the Solidify. That's just going to add a little bit of thickness. This won't look correct if it doesn't have any thickness. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just apply that. And now our plane has this little bit of thickness. Okay, so now I'm going to tab into edit mode. And you can see we don't have many vertices. So if we add this wave modifier that's going to be going on here, it doesn't have any geometry to work with because there's so few points. So if you hit F3, that brings up where you can search. I'm going to type in subdivide. And at the very bottom here, you see Mesh Subdivide. I'm going to click on that. At the bottom left, it brings up this little box. If it's not expanded, just click on it to expand it. And for the number of cuts, I'm going to change it from 1 to 20 and then hit Enter. So this is going to give us a lot more geometry to work with. And now I'm going to tab and get back into object mode. Okay, we're going to go back over to this gear icon, click on Add Modifier, and I'm going to go down to Wave and click on Wave. And as you can see, it's already changed our plane here. So this is going to do all the hard work for us. And these are all the settings you can play with for the wave. These are the 4 that we're going to focus on here. And I'm just going to tell you what numbers I found to be good. So for the speed, I'm going to put 0.01, enter. And that's just going to be how fast the waves are going through. For the width, I'm going to make this 0.13, hit enter. And that's going to be the space in between each of the ripples. The height, I'm going to put to 1. And the narrowness, I'm going to put to 3.5. Height and narrowness are kind of related. They both will make your ripple higher up in the air. If you hover over narrowness, though, it's the distance between the top and the base of the wave. But I found these numbers to be pretty good. And so now let's go ahead and close that for now. I'm going to click on Add Modifier and click on Subdivision Surface. So if you're not familiar, subdivision surfaces kind of smooth everything out. For the render, we're going to want it to 3. In the viewport, you could even leave it at 1. It just won't look as good. But you could go up as high as 3. If you start to, I'm just using my middle mouse to zoom in out. If you start to notice some performance issues, and if you don't have the best computer, you might want to keep your viewport down as that will keep things running smoothly. But I have a pretty good computer, so I'm at least going to put it up. I'm actually going to put it up to 3. So now it's looking pretty good, but if you zoom in here, even with that subdivision surface, we're getting these little tiles here where you can see the squares. That's because we need to shade this smooth. So if I click on F3 or hit F3, I can type in shade, shade, and then click on shade smooth, and you can see that will smooth that out there. Okay, so I'm on the middle mouse wheel to zoom out, and if you just hit the space bar, it will play the animation, and you can see up here, I'm only getting 7 frames per second, so that's pretty slow. So I'm going to hit pause. And you know what? I actually am going to change my viewport. Let's even go down to 1. I'm going to jump back. If you click right here, you'll jump back to the beginning. I'm going to hit the space bar. And you can see the frame per second is pretty quick up here. So you can see we already have a pretty cool effect happening right in front of us. So I'm going to hit space bar to pause it. I like to see it at least a little bit more clearly. So I'm gonna go back to 2, but if you hit spacebar and your frame per second is very low, you can just go ahead and leave that at 1, and just know in your final render it will look better. Go ahead and hit spacebar. Okay, so actually I'm going to go ahead and hit spacebar again just to make sure we're happy with how this looks. And yeah, I'm thinking this looks good. I like the space of the ripples. I like the height, all of that. I'm going to hit spacebar to stop it. But if you want to play around, you could change, you can make it a little faster. You could change the height. All these numbers can be changed, but I think this looks pretty good. So I'm going to close that, and I'm happy with that. So I'm going to close that also. So let's actually start looking at how our scene's going to really look. So I'm going to hit Z and then click on rendered. And right now we're not seeing anything interesting, but we don't have any world lighting. So I'm going to click on this little world icon. And to the right of the color, there's a little circle. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on environment texture. And right now it's all purple because we haven't loaded one in yet. So I'm going to click on open and navigate to where, if you download the files from my website, you'll have this HDR file. If you don't, you could just do a search for HDR Haven and download this yourself. But either way, go ahead and double click and load yourself up an HDR. And you can see now we've got this scene. I'm going to use my middle mouse, click and hold. Now we've got this around our scene, and it's just putting light onto this plane, and it's just a nice way to get some good lighting right off the bat. So if you haven't saved your project yet, take a moment to do so. I definitely recommend saving often. It's better to be safe than sorry. Alright, so once you've done that, let's keep going. So I still have this plane selected. If you don't, just make sure you have left clicked on it. I'm going to go down here to the material properties, and I'm going to click on new. And I'm going to leave the base color. Actually, let's click on the base color. I'm going to drag this white all the way up to make it nice and bright. I'm actually also going to click on this preview, make sure it's expanded out. And I'm just going to change it. I kind of like this preview. I'm going to scroll down here. So we want this to be metallic. So we're going to drag this all the way up to 1. And you can see it's changing here. And then for the roughness, I'm going to click in here and do 0.3. You could play with this value yourself. If you drag it low, it'll be even more reflective, but like crisper, sharper. If you go higher, it'll smooth it out. So somewhere in between is nice. I like around 0.3. You, like I said, can play around with this later. Once we start adding the lights in, you'll have a better sense of if you want to change that value or not. Okay, so now let's actually add some lights. So I'm going to hold Shift, hit A, go down to light, and I'm going to use area lights for this. I'm going to hit 1 to go into my front view, then hit G, bring this up, left click to lock that in. Then I'm going to hit S for scale, and just drag my mouse over, just to make it a little bit bigger, maybe something like that even. And then I'm going to hit R for rotate, and then left click. And so we're just going to place these lights in a few different positions, and we're going to look at different camera angles, or different angles too. So I'm going to hit 3 to go to my side view, hit G, move this over, R for rotate, bring this over. I'm going to keep the lights kind of close to him, hit G, and I'm going to bring this even closer, something like this. And let's do 7 to jump into our top view. I'm going to scroll out a little bit. Oh, actually I'm a little confused about where this light is at the moment. Let me hit 7. Okay, there it is. I'm going to hit Shift D, and that's just going to make another light. Actually, you know what? I'm going to left click and then X and enter. So X for delete and enter to lock in. I'm going to left click on this light, and let's go ahead. I'm going to crank this power up to 2000. So I'm going to type in 2000 and hit enter. And then I'm going to click on the color here, and let's go ahead and make this like a real red. And you can already see it's starting to affect our plane here. I'm going to hit Shift D, make another one, R for rotate, bring it around this way, maybe jump into this front view, hit G, and you just want to start placing these in different spots. So I'm going to hit 7 to my top view, Shift D, bring this one over here, left click, R for rotate, left click, I'm going to hit 1 to go into my front view, and yeah, like I said, you're going to just play with these different angles, and you want it hitting it in different spots. Having 7 in my top view, Shift D. So I'm going to put one more here, R for rotate, left click, Shift D, left click, R for rotate, left click to lock that in. Now I'm just gonna middle mouse around, take a little look, hit 1 to get my front view, hit G, I'm gonna bring this one even really close. I'm gonna hit R to rotate, G, just to give the scene some variety. You can fine tune this later, but just to start, I hit 3 to go to my other view, R for rotate, and I'm just kind of varying this around. Now I'm using my middle mouse wheel to rotate around. I'm gonna hide that little box for a second. And let's start changing the color of these. So I'm gonna zoom in, I'm gonna left click on this one. Let's change this red color to a blue. So now you've got this blue one kind of mixing with this red one. If I left click on this one, let's see, maybe let's go for a purplish. Left click on this one, change this to like a bright yellow, maybe an orangish, and something like that's already looking pretty cool. So I'm just middle mousing in, zooming around, and then middle mouse clicking to orbit around my viewport. So I'm gonna zoom out. So yeah, really this step is where you can use your most creativity, where you can just play with where these lights are. So for example, I'll left click on this light, I'm gonna hit G for move, Z to do it in the Z axis. I'm just gonna bring it down, see how that looks, bring it up. Didn't do much of a change, so I'm gonna hit escape on that. Maybe let's do a G and Y. See how it looks all the way over here. You can really just start seeing where you think these things look good. Maybe let me hit 7 to go to my top view. I do a Shift D to duplicate. Maybe I rotate this around, hit 1. Maybe I hit G and bring this really close in, change the color to like an orange. Let's use the middle mouse. So now you can see, this highlight of this yellowish orange is here. If I type in 0 for the power, you see that's gone. You also could, play with some of the power here. So maybe make this one 5,000. And it's going to really be strong and overpowering these other colors. I'm going to put this back down to 2,000. I think this is good to continue on, but and if you see at different angles, it's going to look different. So, just play around with the lighting and play with the colors until you're happy with the result that you have. So currently this is how it looks with Eevee, and you can get some nice results with this, and you may want to even just complete this project with Eevee. The example animation I showed was using cycles, but let me real quickly, if you are going to use Eevee, let's click on this little render properties button. Let's go ahead and click on ambient occlusion. I'm also going to click on screen space refractions, open that up, and I'm going to take away the half trace. You'll get a higher result this way. And so those are the settings I would change for Eevee specifically. And then whether you're using Eevee or cycles in the end, I also would open up this color management. You could do what I'm about to do in post, but I want to keep this really beginner friendly. So if you want to get the kind of vibrant colors I got without doing anything in post, this is where you'd go. And so under look, I'm going to click on none. And right here, I have very high contrast. So I'm going to click on that. And right away, you can see we're getting a scene with a lot more contrast. Maybe over here, it's too bright. So I still have this light selected. So maybe for me, I'm going to hit G and Z, bring this up a bit, or even turn down the power of that. But I'll leave it up to you. But you can see now we're getting very different lighting. I'm going to scroll down even more and click on this use curves, and then left click on the arrow to expand it out and scroll down. So this can get a little bit confusing if you're not familiar with curves. I mean, it can be even confusing if you are familiar with curves, but I want to take this a little bit further. And if you don't understand exactly what this does, just kind of follow along. So it's kind of hard to get, but I'm going to left click and drag on this little dot over here and pull it down. And so you can see here, once you let go, it'll update. You can see how it's changing the lighting in the scene. So you can find what you think looks good. I'm going to go for something where it's kind of darkening the scene, but it's not completely making it too dark overall. So I'm going to go with something about like that. And I maybe even might click here and pull this down a little bit. So for me, that's maybe a little bit too drastic for the look I'm going for. I'm going to pull it back up a little bit. But if you want to really hone in on the lighting, this is where you could do that. I also want to play with this gamma value. It's another way where we can kind of adjust how bright or dark the scene is. So I'm just going to take it down a little bit. I really like how it just makes the lights extra saturated. And like I said, you'd normally probably do this in post, but for really beginner friendly, I wanted to show you how you could get some of these more saturated, drastic colors that I had in my tutorial, or in the example animation. I do think this is maybe a little too dark, so maybe I'll bring this back up a little bit, and maybe with how I currently have it, I don't actually like the gamma too low, but again, I'll leave that up to you and your own stylistic choices. So I'm just going to take a look at the scene. It's looking pretty cool. I'm going to definitely go ahead and save. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do a little test. So I'm going to hit spacebar, and if your machine isn't the best, you maybe will have issues with this playback, and maybe it's not the best idea. But if you do get, like me, my computer can handle this. I'm getting a decent preview, but you are seeing that there are some kind of weird artifacts. That's partially just because we're doing this live, and if you actually rendered it out, it would look better. But there's also part of it is just kind of how Eevee works, and you can dive a little bit deeper, and there's things you can do to make this look even better. And like, for example, if I hold shift hit A, there are things like these reflection planes and reflection cube maps. I'm gonna hit escape on that. So you could get deeper, make it look even better for Eevee by doing some things like that. But I'm actually just gonna use cycles. I really like the result I got with cycles. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna hit Z to go back to solid mode. Because if I just go over to this right panel and change Eevee to cycles, if you do that while you're currently rendering it, your computer might not like that and might crash on you. So I'm going to switch it back to cycles, and I'm going to save. If you were happy with the result that you were getting with Eevee and you don't even want to try out what I'm doing with cycles, you can definitely jump ahead to when I'm actually exporting the file. But if you want to get a result closer to what I got, keep following along, and you'll see some of these settings I have for cycles. Okay, so I'm going to change a few settings right off the bat. So for this render, the number of samples you have drastically changes the quality of the image you got. But after doing some testing, I was getting good results with just 50. So I'm going to go ahead and click in here and change this to 50. And then viewport is just how many samples you have in the viewport. And to keep things kind of quick, in this case, I'm going to drop this down to 5 and then hit enter. Let's expand this out. We don't need to do that, so I'm going to close sampling. I'm going to open up light paths, and this just has to do, because with cycles it's actually, bouncing around rays and calculating all that, and that's what gives it such great realistic results. But for me, the render times were just way too high for this project. So for total, I'm just going to click in here and take it to 3. And I believe the way it works is this is kind of the cap, and so any of the ones above this won't actually work. But I'm just going to go ahead, just to be sure, I'm going to put 0. We don't need any transparency, and I'm going to click in here and do 0 for transmission, because we don't need that at all. So I'm going to make those both 0. And then continuing down, I'm going to go ahead and turn off both of these settings. And again, it just didn't really affect how our scene looked in this specific case, and I really wanted to get the render time down. So I'm going to tick both of those off. Let's keep going down. I don't know, we don't have any hair in our scene, so we don't need that. We've already messed with the color management. Let's go ahead and click on the little printer icon. For resolution, while we are still testing things, I'm going to put it at 50%. So I'm going to click here and do 50%. And also, if you don't have great hardware, you can actually get a pretty good result rendered out at 50%. So if your render times just end up being too high, even after doing these steps, you may end up doing 50% as opposed to the whole 100. Let's go ahead and leave that. I think there's one more thing I'm looking for. So under this view layer properties, I'm going to close that, and we want this denoising. That just we're using a low sample amount. We're only using 50 samples, and you'll see, there can be little dots on the screen. but the denoising will help minimize that, and you get a much better looking result with way less render times. So that's all the settings I'm going to do. So let's actually see how it's looking. And so I'm going to hit Z and go up and click on rendered. And so depending on your computer, this may be difficult for your computer. It may not be. Just know, compared to Eevee, like for example, if I use my middle mouse and scroll around, it takes a lot longer, and if your system's slow, it might really struggle with actually doing this. So just know that you can also hit Z, go to solid, and then move your middle mouse to move around, and then hit Z and go back to rendered if your computer is kind of struggling with this. But mine's doing well enough, so I'm gonna kind of orbit around and see which kind of side I think looks the best. I kind of like, I actually like what's happening right here. So I'm maybe going to use this side for where the camera's going to be, but let's just go ahead and hit Z, go back to solid. I'm going to hold shift and hit A to add a new object. In this case, I'm going to look for camera and click on camera. And so it didn't actually go in my view. I didn't do the short key for that. So I'm going to hit 1, and I'm going to hit G and bring the camera up. Left click. I'm going to hit 3 to go to my side view. I'm also just going to hit S for scale and just drag this down. I kind of like to have it visually where my camera's pointing more so, and so I like to scale it up. I'm going to hit G to move it over here. And now I'm going to hit 0 to actually look through my camera. So right now, if you used your middle mouse wheel, you actually would pan around your scene. But what I want, I'm going to hit 0 to go back to my camera. I want to have my camera move when I move in my viewport. So you can do this by clicking on or hitting the N key, and that will bring up the right panel. And I'm going to go to View, and then there's this lock camera to view. So I'm going to click on that. So now if I scroll out, the camera will actually move with that scroll out. So really I'm just trying to get a good composition that I like. So again, I'm going to hit Z and go to rendered. If your computer kind of struggles moving around the viewport, you might not want to do that. In my case, it's okay. I'm going to middle mouse and just kind of rotate around a little bit. And I'm going to use shift and middle mouse to pan around. And I'm going to get something like that. I'm going to roll my middle mouse in to get a tighter shot. And again, you can use your own decision making on what you want this composition to be. I'm going to middle mouse, click and hold to kind of go for this maybe a little lower angle. And I'm going to shift middle mouse and move this over a bit. I am paying attention to where, if you don't want to see the edges, make sure you're framing it where you aren't seeing any of the edges. I think this will look pretty cool. I think it does also look really cool if you get really close and zoom in there. I think you get a pretty nice result with that. But I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this lock camera to view. I always like to go ahead and uncheck that so that if you've got the camera where you like it, and then all of a sudden you middle mouse around and then you moved your camera by accident. So I went ahead and unchecked that. But yeah, I'm going to hit 0 to go back to my camera, and I'm liking this. So it's time for us to do a test render. Okay, so I'm going to hit Z and go to solid just to have our computer not working so hard trying to render that. And I'm going to hit F12 to do a test render. And as you can see, it's starting to go through and actually render this out. So this is where you can check your time remaining and see if this is, and like just time and see how long this takes. So just know that if you're rendering out an animation, it's going to be the number of frames times the number of seconds it takes for each frame. So depending on how long you can let your computer sit overnight, or depending on what your machine is, that will depend on kind of the quality you can end up getting. So this render result looks pretty good to me. I'm going to close. It took me 22 seconds, almost 23 seconds. I'm going to close that. So this is where you can click on this kind of output box. For my final output, I'm going to do 100%. But like I said, if it's only gonna be feasible for you, you can get a pretty good result that will look good like on a cell phone at 50%. If your hardware is really not good, you could even drop this down lower, and this one will really increase your render times. And if you go back to the camera icon and click on the sampling, you could even take the samples down. You could probably even do like 30, maybe even 25. That will also help the render times also. And real quick, I'm gonna put my mouse back over here, hit Z, go to rendered. I also wanna just bring up again that you can play with these values that we played with earlier. If you're not loving the exact, how this looks color-wise, maybe you play with this. And again, this could hurt your computer. Your computer, actually mine's kind of struggling with this. I'm trying to click and drag and it won't let me. Let me just type in 0.7. And so if you like this darker scene, you can go for something like that. If it's not what you're looking for, you can jump that back up to 1. If you don't like the high contrast, you go back to none. And again, so if your computer's lagging, just hit Z, go to shading, sorry, what is that, Z? Solid view, and then change the values, and then go back to render. So as an example of that, I'm going to, let's go ahead and like pull this up, back up. I'm gonna hit Z and go to rendered view and see the difference. But since my computer can handle it, I'm gonna go back and try doing this live, just seeing the different, that does have nice highlights when you bring that back up. So maybe I'll even bring this back up pretty high, and let's see if I play with this middle one. You can really see the difference that's making in the scene. You can also kind of really screw things up by playing with this too much. And there's this reset button to get you back to where you started. So actually, let's go ahead and just try that for a second. So you can see this was it without us changing anything. So I definitely want to bring this down. I liked having that down a bit. And let's definitely click and drag and bring that down. I'm much happier with the result from that. I'm also going to go to the world tab. I actually think what I was doing before, I think I had the world lighting down to like 0.6 or something. I think I was liking that result better, and now I'm gonna go back over here and maybe, let's see if I pull the gamma up. No, I'm not really happy. I think I am happy with the gamma at 1. Maybe I just want to bring this back up now that I changed that world lighting. No, it still looks better like this. Bring this back up. No, I guess I liked how things were before. So I'm going to go back and change this to 1, hit enter. And I am happier with how this looks. I do think we could have a little more darkness though. So maybe I will pull this gamma down a bit. So really, it's getting it right for what you want and how you want this to look. But this looks pretty good. I decided I want this to be a little bit brighter, so I am going to, first let's try this again. I know I keep changing the value, but I'm gonna go back to 1. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I like it at the 0.8. I keep going back and forth, maybe even 0.9. There's a little bit more darkness than I want, so I am gonna put that back at 1. And then on the world tab, I'm gonna go ahead and make this 1.5. Just gonna make it a little bit brighter. I was thinking it was getting a little bit too dark and muddy. So I'm gonna hit Z and go to solid, and let's go ahead and render this out. And actually, I want to do a different frame, so you also can just click and drag down here. Let's see how it looks at like maybe one of these early spots like here. So I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna hit F12, or you can also go render image. And now we're just gonna render this out, and we can kind of see what we're looking at. So I think that's looking pretty good. It's gonna take about 20 seconds for me. But yeah, that does look pretty good. You still too could, there's some other angles that, maybe you'd like the camera pointed over here and getting this spot, but that looks pretty good to me. I'm gonna close that, and maybe I'm just gonna check out one more just to make sure I'm happy with how this looks. I'm gonna move over here, hit F12, start rendering, and it's just testing it out and making sure you're happy with the way it looks. So yeah, I'm thinking this looks pretty good. And I'm gonna go ahead and actually just X that out to stop it. So now we actually need to render it out. So while I'm in solid view, I'm just gonna left click on this guy here, jump to the beginning, and I'm gonna hit spacebar. So this is what we're getting here. If you want to render it out, start to finish, by default, the default settings are 1 to 250. So you can do the math on how long that will take you. I'm gonna pause this and jump back to the first frame. If I left click on this plane, in one of the example videos, it starts flat. So if you want that same effect, you can click on this gear icon, open up the wave, click on offset and do 10. And this kind of just stops the wave from happening right off the bat. So now if I hit enter, it's flat and then the wave goes through the plane. So if you want to render that out, you can do that. Or if you're having the issue with just the render time is just way too long and you can't do 250 frames, what you can also do, since this ripple is also a perfect loop, so you can look for the spots where it's exactly the same. So if we get to after a little bit where the ripple's gone through a little bit, we should be able to find 2 frames that are exactly the same. So maybe let's look for where it peaks. So I'm just left clicking and dragging, which kind of scrubs to the timeline. You also can hit right and left. So I'm gonna hit right and then left until I find, so I'm looking for right here. I'm paying attention to where this is. And then if we jump ahead in time, so I'm gonna pay attention, this is frame 147. I'm gonna scrub ahead and look for what looks exactly the same. So maybe it's 173. So let's go between 173 and I actually forgot what this was, 147. I'm going to click here and go to 147. Yep, that looks exactly the same. So you just want to find where those 2 are, and then you can actually just render from one to the other, and you're saving yourself a lot of frames and you'll have a nice looping animation. So let me just double check that was so it's 147. It helps to write this down. I'm writing this down for myself, and I think it was 173. Let me just actually check this out. So you can just type in here 173, and once you hit enter, it will jump. And yes, those are exactly the same. So this is where it's going to loop. And let's go ahead and just change this in the render settings now. So if I click on the little print icon, you have your frame start. So I'm going to click in there and make it 147. And then my end frame, I'm going to make 173. But actually, if you think about it, the way it's really going to work is that you don't need that last frame, because when your animation loops and starts over, that first frame will actually finish off this animation. So I'm actually going to change this end to 172. So now if I jump, I can hit this now to jump to the beginning and then jump to the end. You see there is a little difference, but if I hit the right key, once the animation just starts playing itself over again, the start is the end of the other one, so you don't actually need that frame. Otherwise, you'd be using that frame twice. So at this point, you just want to tailor the settings for you. So for me, I have a pretty good machine, so I'm going to put the resolution fully up to 100. If the render time's even still, so right now, what is that? We're rendering about 147 to 1, so what is that, like 25 frames? So, we're not rendering a ton of frames, so even if it's a minute per frame, it's just going to take you 25 minutes. But if your machine's not great, it's going to take 5 minutes. I guess I should do an example here. So I moved mine up to 100% now. If I go to render image, it's going to start rendering it out. And as you can see already, this is significantly slower than 50%. Right now it's thinking, for me, it's going to take about a minute. But since I know I only need to do 25 frames of this, that's not so bad. But for you, it could be significantly longer, and you may want to just leave that resolution at 50%. So I'm going to hit escape to stop this. And then once it's stopped, I'm going to close that box. So like I said, so for me, I'm cool at 100%. If your render time is still way too high, you might want to put that down to 50%. I guess also I should show you, just to prove that it is looping properly. I'm going to left click here, hit enter, and you can just see it is looping properly. I have noticed that with Instagram, for example, there's a slight little hitch, little glitch at the moment it replays itself. So you might not get a perfectly fluid look if you just upload it. It'll be pretty good, but there's a slight little moment. So sometimes what I do is when I export this video, I actually make another video where I'm stacking the animation to make it like 30 seconds long, so that yes, when it replays, it has that little hitch, but it's only after it's already replayed itself many times. But that's, a little bit more advanced, and you don't have to be so concerned about that. But I would highly recommend rendering out in PNG. This is just a great way that if your machine crashes or something happens, you keep everything that you rendered. But I do want to make this really beginner friendly, and it does add a whole nother step. So I'm not going to do that in this case. But if you definitely look into rendering out PNG image sequences if you haven't yet. But for the case of this video, I'm going to click on PNG and go to FFmpeg video. So we're going to save it out as a video file instead. I'm going to change encoding. So open it up, click here, go to MP4. These are the settings I like. There are other settings. I'm going to change medium quality to, let's see, I'm going to go with perceptually lossless. And then one of the most important things is we need to put this video somewhere. So left click on the folder icon and then navigate somewhere you want to save this. I had mine in my recent. I'm going to call this ripple underscore out animation. Hit enter and then enter. And so that's just telling it where to save. And so now everything, I've got all my settings exactly how I want it. Now I can just click on render animation. And so in this case, at the end of this, we will have a rendered video clip that you then can do whatever you want with. And that's it. And as I mentioned before, you could be rendering this out in Eevee and you could have skipped all that cycle stuff. The whole output where you pick the folder and you change the encoding, all that is exactly the same for Eevee. So just follow those steps and you're going to render out the same way that we rendered out for cycles. I do want to make a final note that you will get a bit of a better result if, for example, if I go back to the render properties, if we didn't actually change these settings here and the curves, if you did this in post by using like levels, for example, you will get a better result. You can just really fine-tunely get a change in how bright and dark each of these things are. But I wanted to keep this really simple for beginners and not have to go through the whole post process. But I can go into that in more detail for people who are interested in a future video. But I just wanted to note that this is a little bit of a workaround to keep things simple for beginners, but you won't get quite as good results as changing these colors in post. And that's definitely a topic that you should look into further if you want to really make this scene look great. If you enjoyed the tutorial, please go ahead and like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. It really does motivate me to keep making videos. Happy blending!